to welcome David Fell, who's the founder and director of Brook Lyndhurst, and he's looking at consumer behaviour, if you like, from an economic point of view, from an economist's point of view, but particularly from the perspective of sustainability. David Fell.
I'm even more scared than usual. Normally I look around, I'm scared of you looking at me with the eye tracking stuff. So I don't want you. In fact, I'm considering doing the presentation this way around. I'm scared also because that was a pretty amazing presentation with a lot of kind of head-mangling stuff, and I've just got about 6 slides with pictures that look like this. But the main reason I'm scared is because I'm not convinced it's an urban myth, I'm afraid. All the work that Simon sort of summarised and referenced, someone's paying for that. Someone's using it. And they are using it on us. Human weaknesses and foibles are being managed. And it may be that dear little Tesco aren't deliberately doing anything, but Tesco, in conjunction with Waitrose and Sainsbury and all the others, in conjunction with the advertising and marketing industry, in conjunction with the big brands, they may all be under the same kind of pressure to meet shareholder requirements, but they are deploying enormous resources to make sure we do the things they would like us to do. One of the names that Simon didn't reference is a chap called Bernays, who pretty much invented 20th century marketing back in the 30s, and he used the phrase, the engineering of consent. All that we've heard, all that we experience when we go through these supermarkets is the engineering of our consent, so that we have the subjective experience of making these choices, but a great deal of it is not quite as autonomous as we might like to think. So I'm a little scared, and what I want to spend 20 minutes or so doing is trying to give some pointers to how we might get a bit less scared, particularly with respect to local food. I want to start though with a couple of examples that were prompted by what Simon was saying. These kind of illustrations of how human animals might do or say one thing, or say one thing and do another. We did some research on bags for life. A few years ago, a pilot scheme was being run to try and encourage people to use fewer carrier bags. We were doing out-of-store interviews as people came out to talk to them about their bag use. And a non-trivial proportion of the people who would answer the question when we asked them, how often do you use a reusable bag? They would say, I always use a reusable bag, whilst visibly in possession of 10 or 15 plastic carrier bags. They really believed they always used it, they just didn't. That was one I enjoyed. Another one I particularly enjoyed was, we did some work years ago on what we called the personality of shopping centres. As animals, and some of the environmental issues you were just describing, we need to feel comfortable in a particular place in order to do the things that to fulfil the goals that we've set for ourselves or have been set for ourselves. And if you find yourself in an environment in which you feel uncomfortable, either it doesn't quite suit you, or particularly if the people don't look like you or feel like you, if you think they're not really me, you'll either go away or you'll spend much less. And the particular client we had was an investor who owned lots of big shopping centres and had noticed that the rents they were achieving inside these shopping centres weren't performing in the way they'd anticipated. Normal practice on the high street is either side of the big anchor store, traditionally the M&S, and you get 2 small units, you'll see. And the rentals in those 2 small units are the highest on a typical high street. Okay? because everyone goes to M&S or whatever the anchor store is, and so being near to M&S where the footfall is very high is very lucrative. So you tend to get those smaller stores that sell sort of reasonably expensive knickknacks. And in these shopping centres, that wasn't happening. What our client was finding was that the occupiers of these smaller stores were perpetually failing. They couldn't afford the rent, and they had no idea why. So they commissioned people to watch thousands of hours of videotapes. And what emerged was that when you leave the M&S on the high street, your body gets a visual cue that you have left the shop. There's a change in temperature. Right? So you can immediately start looking for the next shop. When you leave the anchor store in the ambient conditions of the shopping centre, there's no change, and people drifted an average of about 50 metres before they clicked into where's the next shop mode. It was nothing to do with the messages or the light. It was just, as an animal, I'm kind of right, now where am I? By which time I've passed the little shop, and that's why it goes out of business. Solution, a blast of cold air. Next time, most of you probably don't visit these kinds of capitalist environments, but try it on sociological grounds. Go to a big sort of shopping centre, and you'll note that these days you get a blast of air at the transition between the door and the corridor, just to click your body into find the next shop. Your consent is being engineered. The emotions, those emotions are, in my world where we do all this work in behaviour change, commensurate with values, the things that we feel, the kind of ethics deep inside us. And although surveys are unreliable guides, you can do quantitative surveys, depth interviews, all sorts of things, most people over time are able to express reasonably well what it is they think about the world, what they feel, and the things that are important to them. And when we ask them, they say things that probably wouldn't surprise you, and in many ways are reassuring. I'm going to draw on some work that I've just been doing for the Fair Trade Foundation, just to give you a couple of kind of hot off the press numbers. So when we ask people, how important is it, do you think, that the following issue should be, that people when they're out shopping should bear in mind? We said to them, well, how important do you think it is that that people should be thinking about reducing packaging? You know, when they're shopping, on their mind should be the idea that they shouldn't be generating quite so much rubbish. 80% of people either strongly agreed or slightly agreed. That was something that people should be doing. Well, what about something like reducing harm to the environment? How important should that be as people go shopping? 74%. What about something like animal welfare? How important do you think it is that when people are out shopping, they bear in mind animals? 75%. You know, and a solid 35% saying that is really very important. A third of everybody says is exceptionally important that people, when they're out shopping, think about animal welfare. We can ask a similar question about, what about producers and retailers? How important is it that they should be thinking? Oh, same, 75%. Really very, very important that people, or that producers and brands do this. If you ask them about health, most people know that broccoli is healthy and important in their diet. It's a good thing, you know. It's kind of, we've known this for thousands and thousands of years. But what people do is they go out in a hurry and they're all stressed, and all of that falls by the wayside for many of the reasons that Simon was sort of explaining. It's not in people's minds for all sorts of reasons. And one of the failures of a lot of the initiatives and movements to kind of promote these issues with respect to those food choices fall at this very hurdle. That it's just not in play when people are actually doing the shopping. And I want to sort of add a sort of slightly tangential dimension to what Simon was saying, because I don't disagree with any of it. That we've been distinguishing between sort of what we call primary and secondary filters in how people shop when they confront this. Price may not be being noticed by most people on an individual item basis, but total price of the shop is noticed. You know, that kind of what it all added up to at the end. The existence of special offers, okay? The bundling of special offers. This is another area where your consent gets engineered. Is that you know, those kind of £10 meals and the things that are on the end of the aisle and the presentation of one item and another item so that you buy in combinations, those kinds of things. Now, those are very, you know, important to people. Convenience, how much time you've got, your habits, the brands, there's all sorts of things that are in play first, and they largely explain what it is people do. Then there's a bunch of secondary issues. If a given product or a given type of shopping can get through the price, affordability, convenience, how much time I've got kind of filters, then you get on to another bundle of things. And that bundle is about the environment, health, looking after, making sure the chickens live happy lives. Is it organic? Is it locally produced? Is it fair trade? And our work's suggesting those things are all in competition with one another as secondary filters. For a lot of people, okay, that bit of their brain that says, I know this is important. That's why I said, yes, it's very important when you asked me the question the first time around. You kind of know, most people know those are good things. Okay? But they want to, in the conditions of meeting all those sort of primary filters, they then want to achieve some sort of what we've been calling ethical glow. Just that nice feeling that they've done their little bit because their lives are hard and they're busy and they haven't got enough money and they haven't got enough time, but they don't want to feel like a bad person. No one wants to feel like a bad person. They want to feel like a good person. So having fulfilled the criteria of buying food and feeding the family and staying inside the budget and getting it done on time, then it would be nice if I had, I'll just buy some fair trade tea, or we'll have an organic chicken this week, or I'm sure I think I'll go to the locally sourced vegetable bit and get a bit. Right? There are very, very few people who go the whole hog on this. The survey work we've just done for Fair Trade suggests that like a really weird 1 in 1,000 goes the whole way. You know, many of you in the room are here because food matters to you, local food matters to you. You know, building a better world from the bottom up matters to you. Most of you still go to the supermarket now and again, you know. So there's something very interesting about the relationship between all that kind of primary stuff and fulfilling your life and feeling like a good person, and how these other issues fit in with that, which goes to the heart, I think, about what local food is all about, which is how do you get from that small thing to make it bigger? Do you get those who are already passionate about it to spend more of their time, more of their money buying local? Or do you get millions of people to buy a little bit of local, and they may potentially require very different strategies? I wanted to just get a little bit bigger picture as well, because as well as there being these kinds of issues of habit and money and so on and so forth, we do, and I'm glad capitalism comes up. I'm always excited at conferences about how big it will go. You never quite know, do you? You know, people are going to come along and stay kind of local and small. How much of the heads do we want to open up here and have a look at? So I want to just open up your head a bit, since you've already started. That is a way of characterising the world that most people live in. It's just a kind of simple wordle. Although I'm an economist, I can't really add up very well, so I try not to use numbers, and words often do the job. Most people spend most of their time in a world that's framed like that. Any of you who are kind of covering the kind of current debate that's going on about values and frames might have a little to say about the framing notion, but everything kind of, and the reason for putting the image like that is to show how everything interconnects. Okay? These things don't exist in isolation. Choice in the modern world isn't sort of some separate thing. It's happening in this very complex context. A narrative structure in which everything hangs together. The life you're supposed to lead, the way life works for people, most people these days, is about having a nice holiday and earning enough money to buy the things they want and being able to treat themselves and getting on and having new gadgets. A very large proportion of people these days want to be famous, simply in order to be famous. TV dominates, advertising, and these things will hang into one another. So words like sustainability or the environment don't fit in. So people might say them, and some bit deep inside them might think they're important or valuable, but they don't sort of fit into the overall structure of how our modern economy actually works. And an argument I've been making in terms of sustainability circles for a number of years now is that to try and just sort of insert sustainability into that, insert local, where does local food fit in that? How do you? We do need to change. Okay. This is the acme of that. Right? I thought that looks like a saucepan. And it is a saucepan, but it is no ordinary saucepan. That is a saucepan that would cost you £160,000. This is gold, those are diamonds. What kind of world needs that? That is the world that needs that. Okay? And as long as we continue to live in a world in which that sort of thing exists, and which sets a whole frame of aspiration, I'd really like a better saucepan. We've done work on. Can you shout at me when I've got 5 minutes, because you'll just really nightmare. We've done work about people's attitudes towards products, I've got these sort of researchers who work at Brook Lyndhurst, and they're well-meaning, positive about the environment. We send them out to do sort of focus groups with people about when and how much they buy of things. Coming back ashen-faced from these focus groups, right? Because they've sat in front of people who have said things like, well, I had to throw away the toaster and the kettle and the oven because it didn't match my new cutlery. That's what this is about. Everything connected and hanging in on itself. The definition through consumption. That's pretty big picture stuff. We need to be more, I think, in a world that looks a bit like that. Those are all interlocking concepts, okay, which you might personally not quite find so appealing, but it's just another way of framing how environment, care, community, other aspects that seem inherent to the sustainability agenda, and I think much of the local food agenda kind of is associated with, but look how different it is. And we're in the business, I think, or part of what my passion is about, is how do we get from there to here? It's not just a case of doing one thing, and that's part of the challenge. Everyone's locked into their lives, surrounded by all that stuff. Is this revolution? Evolution? Where do we start? We need to think about intervention points. Here's an example of how it can be done, because most of the big change that you will have experienced in recent times is as a result of the operation of capital in pursuit of return to shareholders. Okay, if you think about the things that have changed in the last 20 years, the mobile phones, the internet, high definition television, tweets. Sorry, I am going to learn how to love tweeting. Someone somewhere is making money from that. Try and find the examples of dramatic social change where that hasn't been why. And you have to start in the late 1930s with this photo. This is Don Bradman, any cricket fans? He's just scored yet another staggeringly large number of runs. I don't know the details, please know. Here's another cricket photo. This is 15 years later. Someone else has just scored a staggeringly large number of runs. The difference between these photos are the hats. Lots of hats. No hats. Space of less than a generation. This was a social change. I'm not saying it's necessarily the same as the radical transformation of capitalism, but it is a social change from which no one in particular made any money. People just did it because, well, we can speculate during the debate perhaps why they did. So I just wanted to flag up, it does happen. It is possible. It's not always easy. I'm nearly there. Local food. I'm a big fan of honey. One of the reasons I like it is it never goes off. They found 3,000-year-old honey in Egypt. It's still edible. No one knows quite how it works. It contains compounds that still defy 21st century science. So I think it's kind of emblematic, and it is, of course, one of those classic local foods. I just wanted to kind of raise a couple of questions as much as anything else. The people who currently buy local food, and in the survey I mentioned earlier, again, 75 to 80% of people say, yes, local food is very important, may not be the same as everyone else. It is reasonably well known that the people who are first movers, who start a new trend, okay, small in number, and then the trend slowly picks up, and then it goes mainstream and everybody does it. But the people who move first are odd. It's part of why they innovate, part of why they take on these new products. And all too often, it is assumed by either policymakers or strategists or researchers that if we can look at the characteristics of the people who started buying local food, the people who come to the Abergavenny Food Festival, that we can then say, right, well, we did this and this and this to promote local food to these people. All we've got to do now is kind of use those techniques to promote to the rest of the audience, rest of the consumers, and they'll start buying it too. No. The people who move first are odd. They're different from, and the reasons for doing it, the reasons why they started buying local honey, may be completely different from the reasons why the mainstream consumer might buy that same honey. And in fact, if anything, some of the work we're on at the moment suggests there's a kind of an inversion, that early movers start on the basis of values, passionate reasons for doing something, which they express through their choice. But for the mainstream, it's the other way round. They express their choice in some automatic way, which then introduces them to the kind of values associated with that choice. Which is quite a weird way of thinking. So it may mean, back to some of the questions about how does local food get bigger, that you have to kind of rethink how it's got this far. Yeah, there may be some. And final bit, I think there is a really interesting question about the supermarkets versus the local delivery. How do people feel about their local produce being in Tesco or in Morrison's? I think it's back to that big picture thing about how everything hangs together. There's something kind of radical and bottom-up and transformational that's inherent to local food and local producers that's antithetical to the kind of mainstream stakeholder, big money, big capital. What kind of struggle, what are the goals here? Is it just to sell more local food, or is it to transform capitalism? I look forward to finding out. Thank you.